People just want to feel seen and heard at the end of the day, period. Especially when you're building this huge project for them, they're investing all this money. They want to feel like you get them and not like you're just steamrolling them with your agenda. So I think little things like that, it's like, oh my God, they saw me, they listened to me. And then that builds so much trust also.
Welcome back to the Modern Craftsman podcast. Today's guest is Jamie, wait for it, Gasparovic. I got it right?
You did.
We recorded this at the end of the podcast, and somewhat of a challenging last name that Nick and I had a quick bet on as far as who was going to say it right. Neither one of us did, but she told us we wouldn't get it right. I believe I just did, and this is recorded after the podcast, so I'm going to give myself some kudos there. But she is the founder and principal designer of Studio Gaspo, a luxury interior design firm redefining what it means to build a high-end home. So her background is in advertising and international business, and she brings a brand strategist mindset to every project, transforming homes into bold, refined reflections of identity. She's not just designing interiors, she's architecting experiences, leading with clarity, creativity, and fierce intentionality. Let's take a dive into what it really looks like to lead fearlessly in luxury design and why ordinary isn't in Jamie's vocabulary. This podcast is brought to you by Andersen Windows. When pros in this industry trust a product for their own home, you know it's built to last. And that's exactly the reputation of Andersen 400 series windows and doors. The 400 series product line is as solid as they come, time-tested and proven to perform. It strikes the perfect balance between durability, performance, and timeless style, all while fitting a wide range of budgets. Engineered with a clad wood construction with coastal options available, 400 series products can stand up to some seriously tough conditions. So whether you're working on a traditional project, a contemporary project, or even a home of your own, you can find a trusted solution in the Andersen 400 series product line. It's no wonder these products are a go-to for so many in our industry. For more information, head over to andersenwindows.com/moderncraftsman. And for the record, I'll be using 400 series on my house. We're going to be using the triple pane 400 series, but they are the window of choice for our own house. So they're not lying here.
This podcast is brought to you by Build-A-Trim. Insurance is probably not the coolest part of the job. Until something goes sideways, then it's everything. Build-A-Trim just dropped a free on-demand webinar that breaks down how to actually protect your business from risk, not just hope for the best. It's packed with no BS insights from the industry experts. And the best part, it's free, fast, and it's waiting for you right now. Take an hour, learn how to cover your business properly, and get back to building with peace of mind. Head over to buildatrend.com/MC insurance webinar and watch it today before you wish you did.
This podcast is brought to you by Velux. When you install Velux skylights in your build, you won't just be adding natural light and fresh air into any space. You'll be installing a globally trusted brand in your client's home. Skylights take any project from looking good to looking great, but Velux skylights will make you look great too. Visit veluxusa.com/remodeler to learn more about the products that will make word get out about your next build. So I'm meeting with the architect on Wednesday to sort out some details on our own home, but then finalize design for that little screened-in porch that we're doing. And I know we had the conversation, but I was like, yo, we need to add a few skylights to the build. So we're going to be adding them when I talk to him on Wednesday.
I love the fact that everything that we promote here on the podcast is stuff that we use anyway.
Yeah.
It's so easy to talk about. Speaking of which, Harnish Workwear, also a sponsor of the podcast. Workwear hasn't kept up with the times until now, because Harnish Workwear is bringing high-performance design and innovation to the job site with gear that's built to move, breathe, and last. No bulk, no gimmicks, just sharp, functional apparel made for top-tier performers who expect excellence and have a devotion to mastering their craft. I've been wearing their hoodies, I've been wearing their pants, and their t-shirts pretty much every day, and every detail feels intentional, a word that you know I love. Smart pocket placement, stretch where it matters, and fabric that performs in any weather. If you want to learn more, check out Harnish Workwear at harnishworkwear.com and be part of a limitless growth and elevated purpose.
Also, with regard to harness, I've been speaking with Alex, and we're looking to do like a quick little fun rebrand to get some shirts out. So I posted a post a while ago, and I had on a tie-dye shirt that my kids made, and everyone's like, "Yo, where can I get those tie-dye shirts?" So he did a little rebrand. I think I'm gonna get some shirts made through their H label with the new rebrand, which is like different than my company logo, but just kind of fun, and maybe try and find some tie-dye shirts to get them printed on. So if you guys are interested, I might be having Harnish do that little H label partnership there. So I'll keep everyone posted.
Oh, actually, speaking of H label, we've been toying with the idea of doing another Modern Craftsman run as well. I'm just gonna leave that there. If you're interested and think we should do it, comment on our latest post on Instagram. Tell us that you want a T-shirt, and we will consider it. All right. Well, welcome to our brand new podcast, Jamie. How are
you? Good. How are you? Tyler looks like he has his shit together. At least he's in like a dark room by himself.
I always do.
I don't have my shit together.
Is this? I have Father's Day stuff on my desk that I noticed is in here.
This is how we're starting the podcast. Tyler has shit together.
I always have my shit together.
My shit's together.
No, it's not.
No, it's not, because actually that wall fell down. I don't
fell
know
down?
How. Yeah, it's an acoustic, like they're acoustic panels.
Oh.
And they've been up for months. And I came in Monday and they were just all down. Like my YouTube trophies dented, like ruined my day.
You have a YouTube trophy?
Yeah, I got a YouTube.
Not anymore.
Damn. Wow.
Yeah, right here.
Good job.
Oh yeah, thanks.
Adds character.
Sure. I'm like, do I order a new one or do I just accept it? Or do I just wait till I get 1 million?
That's the better. Yeah, there you go. Level up, and then you can.
I don't think the $1 million. I don't think the 1 million subscriber dents is easy. That thing's just aluminum.
So I think the first thing I want to do is we're both going to take stabs at pronouncing your last name.
Oh yeah, that's fun.
See who's the closest.
All right,
I'm going to go for. I think I'm not certain about the last, if it's like a CH sound or just a C sound, but I'm kind of thinking Gasparovic.
I was going to say Gasparovic.
But neither of you is correct. Nick was closer. I think it probably was Gasparovic originally, but then, America, and they like cut. But it's Gasparovic.
Gasparovic, all right.
What did I say? Oh,
Gasparovic. Yeah, Gasparovic.
I pronounce it exactly the way it's like spelt. Gasparovic. Oh, that makes sense. Yeah.
Gasparovic. Asparagus.
Gasparovic. That was like my set. I got the end part wrong, but it was one of the two as far as like where you're enunciating.
Where the emphasis goes. Yeah.
Yeah, is either one or the other. Damn, missed it. All right, well now we know.
You'll probably still butcher it if you say. People do this podcast all the time. They're like, okay, and then they intro me and then they get it wrong still, so it's fine.
Gasparovic. I'm telling you, it was one or the other. It's close. All right.
Yeah. I like the asparagus reference. Yeah. I've always been terrible at reading things. Like, I read it exactly the way it's spelled, like a child.
That's okay.
So you're in Florida?
Yes, I am.
Oh, how's the weather down there?
Very hot.
A little warm?
Mm-hmm.
Are you from Florida?
Literal 100 degrees. No. I'm from Philadelphia originally.
Oh.
I lived in Texas, and then I've been here for 20 years.
How long were you in Philadelphia?
Until I was 4.
We may have already had this conversation.
I think we did.
Met in person. I'm sorry.
Because you're in New Jersey, right?
Correct.
Yeah. All my family is from there and lives there, like extended family. So we're there at least once a year usually.
Nice. We were just talking about this with a bunch of the CCS crew. It's like, I can take 100 degrees, but just not with humidity. And Florida is very humid.
It's terrible. We're trying to move somewhere else because it's horrible here.
Yeah. I'd be tough, like raining every day and just making it even more humid.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it doesn't take it off. It just makes it grosser. So
where do you want to move?
TBD. Nashville's on the list. Okay. Philly area is on the list. So we'll see. Cool. My brother actually lives in Boston also, Nick.
So, really?
Yeah.
Not on the list.
I used to want to move to Boston right after college, but I couldn't get a job. And then now I don't think I could deal with that winter situation. So.
Oh, yeah. The winter sucks.
Yeah.
I don't think it's that much better in
Not
Philadelphia.
in Philly,
No.
I think it is. It's not as frigid. That's like 6 hours south. Makes a difference.
That's like
I would
a
say
degree.
it's pretty close. They might get a little bit more snow than us, but
we don't even get snow anymore.
It's pretty close. I just wouldn't want you to move to Philly and be like, it's going to be way better than Boston to get up here and be like, this shit sucks. It's freezing.
I mean, I know it's cold. Anyway, I don't know where I'm moving. I'll let you guys know. I'll let you give the final okay before I move, okay?
Okay. So the way we typically start off is just like a little bit of background about yourself. For our listeners, just who you are, what your background. I mean, I find your background to be fairly interesting coming from a more corporate background, but just how you got to where you are today and anything interesting that you would want our listeners to know prior to diving into this conversation.
Do you want me to just go?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
We're rolling.
Oh, well, I don't know. I hope you're cutting half of this. Okay.
Oh, no, we just go.
All right. I am Jamie Gasparovic. I am the founder of Studio Gaspo, which is a full service design firm based out of Central Florida. But we always say we'll go anywhere that we have a great project. We're happy to travel for the right client. We take a really identity driven design approach. So I think a lot of times people are starting with exterior factors when they're thinking about design. And we really flip that on its head and want you to look internally to who you are, what your ambitions are, and then how we can reflect that in your space. I started in a corporate background prior to design, like a lot of designers. This is not my first, career. And I was in marketing and international business and did that for a few years, kind of decided, design's really my passion and I can make a living out of that, which I didn't know when I was 18, and going to college. So pivoted, went back to school, got my design degree, started my firm shortly after because there was no one really in the area doing what I wanted to do. So I just started my own thing right away. And that's kind of how I got here today. I've been in business 7 years and love it.
And it's always been in Florida?
Yes. Okay. Always been in Florida.
I read something on The Designer Within that you said that the reason you went off on your own was because you don't like people telling you what to do.
Oh, yeah.
I laughed and I was like, I feel that.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I always say now, I am unemployable for sure. All I can do is be my own boss, I think, at this point and run a company, but I could never work for someone else. I just like to, make the rules. And I think I can do things in a better way than they're done a lot of the times. And I just love having the ability to actually be able to act on that and do that.
Do you think, what type of boss do you think that makes you, having those character traits?
Ooh, you'd have to ask my employee what type of boss I am. But I think I am very willing to hear new ideas. Although I don't like being told what to do, I'm not like a my way or the highway.
Yeah.
I think the best idea wins, and it's not always mine. It's often mine, but not always. So if someone has great input, I am happy. I have no ego about that. I'm happy to take input, feedback. I just always want the company and myself to be the best that we can be. So however we get there, I'm happy to listen to other people's input.
Yeah, I think a lot of people who have that mindset where it's I started my business because I don't want to work for anyone else. I don't want to have to listen to other people. You have to be careful that you don't sway towards the side of things, like you said, where it's my way or the highway, where it's I want to own my own company because I just want to do things my way, because then when you have employees, that's going to be a very difficult conversation. I don't feel like you'll be able to retain employees.
I agree. But I think something that works to my employees' benefit is that I don't want to be super restricted by, okay, we're coming to the office 9 to 5, 5 days a week. This is how it is. That's not how I like to function and live. And as a creative person, it's sometimes I'm working super early. Sometimes I'm working, super late. I don't necessarily keep regular hours. So I kind of extend that to my team as well, where it's I care about results. I care about great work, and however you go about getting to that result, I don't really care. You have the autonomy, like you're an adult. I trust you. If I didn't, I would not have hired you. So she has a lot of flexibility when it comes to, her schedule, her hours, how she gets things done. But I want the end result.
Is there a metric by which you are gauging the amount of time invested in these projects? Like where it's not like, oh yeah, well, the checkbook's open, whatever it takes, it takes.
Oh yeah, the checkbook is never open. I'm sure you guys know that. It does not matter how much
Well,
money.
that's what you have to be careful of, right? Where it's like when you're so focused on getting to the end result, and like the end result is so critical to you. And I know that like Nick's ran into this, I've ran into this. For me, it's easier to control. But like if you are just like, at the end of the day, what matters most to me is this turns out just the way I anticipated, that can wind up costing you a ton of money as a business owner.
Yeah, I think so. We charge our clients flat fee, and that is based on historical data and knowing, how long things take us to do and the value we bring to the project, all of that. So we do, even though we charge flat fee, we do still track hours in like broad strokes. I'm not like, I need, to the 0.1 of an hour, exactly what you're doing. It's more for data for us so that I do know how much time things take us, to complete a project. But I would rather have it on me. Like if I want to fall down this rabbit hole because I'm obsessed with this and I'm thinking about this at 2 a.m, like, how do I charge you hourly for that? So I would rather just know, okay, this is the flat fee we've put forth. This is the amount of time that equates to on our side, and then kind of make that call if we want to go down a crazy creative trail. I'm not charging the client for that. But I think we also talk a lot about what's the 80-20 here. I have that discussion with my senior designer, like, what are you spending a lot of time on that maybe the juice isn't really worth the squeeze that we could cut back on and just make it more efficient? Because I don't want us to be constantly overrunning on creative time and that kind of thing. But for me, I would rather bill flat fee. The client knows what's happening up front, and then I can, take it upon myself to manage the creative hours.
So it sounds to me as though you manage your employees' hours, what they're investing in each project more tightly than your own. Like you're willing to invest more of your own time. If it goes over, it typically is on your time because it's what you want to do than on your employees.
Well, not necessarily. So I'm spending a lot of time also operating the business, not in the business, so at least, I'd say 60% of my time is CEO stuff, not actually working on projects. So, the team is actually working on projects all the time. So I am cognizant of their hours. I think the point is I'm tracking hours like per project. I'm not tracking them to micromanage her. Like, I want to make sure we're working this many hours a week and blah, blah, blah. I just want to know, what is it taking us to complete a project of this scope, of this design caliber. So I have that information moving forward. So maybe if we are falling down a lot of those rabbit holes and it's like, wow, we charged for 400 hours on this, but really we spent 550, like maybe my next design fee is going up, or again, we're analyzing that 550. Was it really necessary, or were there things that were kind of like spinning wheels on that we could get a little more efficient on?
How often are you over the hours? Because that's always the concern with fixed cost or flat fee in the design world. It's you're either always over, or you're always trying to make sure that you don't go over, and you're basically impacting the project potentially negatively to make sure that you're not doing that. Because I mean, neither is a really good solution. The best solution, obviously, is to know exactly how long it's going to take and execute on that and be profitable every project. But your example just a minute ago is, okay, we lost profit on this. The next job, I'll make up for it. And, that can be a snowball effect pretty quickly, where it's all of a sudden your design fee is so inflated because of mistakes or going over on hours for the last 5 projects. You did allude to the fact that you kind of look backwards and understand if they were warranted or not. But I'm curious, just historically, how often are you right on the money with your hours?
I think we're pretty close, now that we've done quite a few of these projects and we have this data. I know I also work within a really tight scope of work. So it's not just like, here's a flat fee and then like, we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
It's a flat fee tied to a very defined scope of work. A lot of our projects are new construction. So that's a pretty straightforward scope of work where it's like
Sure.
building the whole house, we're designing the whole house. But when we have renovations too, it's like very spelled out exactly what we're doing in each space, what's included, and then down to the phase of the project where we call it project fulfillment. Some people call it project management. I don't like that term because as a designer, I'm not managing your project. You have a superintendent on site. Like you're the ones who are managing the project. That phase for us during construction is we're making sure that the design is being executed as the client and we intended it to be. And we're available for questions or that kind of thing, to the contractor, to trades, to keep construction moving. So we have all that really spelled out so that it's clear, like this is what's included in the flat fee. And then if for some reason you need additional support, hand-holding, your contractor sucks, and then we have to pick up the slack, like there is additional fees associated with that. So I think that helps like keep that balance where it's like, if you can stay, if the team is good, if you can, stay an uncrazy client and we can get this scope of work done, this is what it should take us. And we're pretty spot on with that.
Yeah, I think a really clearly defined scope is what makes any of this fixed cost stuff successful, but also tied to like clear deliverables.
Yeah.
Where it's like, sure, you have your clear scope, but what are the deliverables? Because some of the biggest failures I see, especially in design or like for us, like pre-construction, is client just doesn't understand where they're at in the process.
Yeah.
I just got out of a meeting before this and the project's going great, client's great, everyone's happy. But they, even at one point in the call, they're like, where are we in the design process?
Yeah.
And I was like, man, like, why is this so, it's not that it's difficult, but it's just, it constantly gets overlooked in the sense of the client has no idea. They don't know anything about the design process. Like, and you have to assume that. And I've always made this reference to like, when they're building a playground in a town, they always put, or at least where I grew up, they put this big piece of plywood that was painted like a thermometer. And they go out there and a guy would fill in. Yeah, they keep filling it in and be like, oh my God, we raised $50,000. We can build the playground. And I've talked about this for years now, where it's like, it's almost like I need to give them a thermometer and just
a progress bar.
Hey, this is where we're at. Yeah.
Or like when you go to apply for your business license, at least here, like as you fill it out, even if there's certain things that are incomplete, it tells you what percentage is done as you're going. Like that'd be sick to try and.
Yeah, progress bar is nice. I think we like that feedback, as humans, where you're not just in the dark spinning around. How much longer is this questionnaire?
Right.
So we try to, like you were saying, Nick, they don't know. And it seems to be this very confusing process. Every design firm does things differently too. So that there's not like a standard, this is how everyone does it. So I think we're always trying to set expectations up front, communicate, and then over communicate. That's been one of my biggest lessons, where no matter how many times I think I said something or it's in the contract in the PDF and we talked about it here, it's still like they didn't hear it, or when it comes that time, they don't know. So we're constantly refining our process to try to over communicate those things to clients so they don't feel in the dark. We pretty recently started a thing like every time you're in the next phase of the process, we're sending you an email with a really nice PDF that says, congrats, you've entered the procurement phase. Here's what that means. Here's what's included. Here's everything, like a callback to the contract. Here's what you signed. Here's what you agreed to, just so you remember, and just bringing that back up again, like at multiple points in the project so they can remember. Because I think it is like, again, no matter how many times I think I've communicated, okay, we've done it all. Like I hit that snag in the project the next time, like, okay, I'm going to say it 1,001 times this next project then. So I think it's important.
I think I saw something on your social and you had posted something about collaboration, and how it's really the importance of collaboration, communication, and education. And when it comes to home design and construction.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, when you posted that or now, how much does the construction and the builder, really play into your success in terms of the, in terms of what you're doing, the success, like the progress and like communicating progress and, like how is the builder tied to that?
Enormously, they are. I mean, and I always tell people like deciding on your builder is the biggest thing that's going to make you love your life or hate your life by the end of this, honestly. Like, because all of the things that I'm saying and all of the value that we're providing is only as good as the builder actually using it. Like, we have had scenarios where we have this lovely design drawing package and the GC is not even looking at it. And so then it still is creating the problems of last minute calls to the client. Oh, we're putting in the electrical. Where's this going? And we're like, page 42, you've had it for 6 months. Like, what are you talking about? So it's very crucial. And I think, we're trying to get more and more and more picky with who we're working with, because I've just seen how it can like ruin a client's life having a bad partner on the team. And I don't want that to be the case, and then it goes down to everything. Like, the quality of the design goes down if people are not, A, looking at our drawings, but B, like willing to do things that are a little bit outside of the ordinary. We are trying to achieve something for the client and do something that's not just builder grade, spec house special. And we can't do that if, the build partner is not on board. So I think it's huge, and it's like either way, like it could be a huge asset or a huge detriment.
I hate the term builder grade.
Me too.
I just hate the fact that but like because we're builders, right? Like, I'm a builder and it's like, oh, that's builder grade. It's like, it's not. Like, that's not my grade, you know, and you're lumping me as
You're special.
I know I'm special, but there's a lot of special guys out there, like that. I just, whatever. Complete side.
Sorry to offend you, Nick.
You've offended me now twice. I'm keeping tabs.
I never really, I guess, never really was aware of the fact. I mean, I guess I was, but I was maybe just ignorant to the fact that like there's not that much of a standard of processes or operations in the design world, which is very similar to what we do, where it's like you can do things your own way, and some people are hourly, some people are fixed costs, some people are a blend of the two, and like the challenges that creates when bringing on new clients, where it's like, what's your program, what's important to you, how, like, this is how we operate. It's got to be so difficult, and it's very similar to what we do, where it's like, how do we ensure that a client's the right fit? But then on the other hand, like, typically if design's coming to you first and then you have to rely on a contractor to execute your design, that's where I would be out, where I'm like, there's like either these contractors or we're handing over the design and then stepping back at this point, because I feel like with a bad contractor, your design could go to shit and that experience could go to shit so quickly. Like, your reputation, your business, your design, all the time that you've spent curating this entire experience can go out the window like day one of a project.
Yeah.
Can I play devil's advocate here for a second?
Yeah.
Why, as a builder, right? Like Tyler, when we're working with a sub and we have high expectations, right? We're not hiring this guy, bringing them in and just letting them do the electrical. Like, we're like, hey, these are my expectations with you. What, Jamie, from your side, that guy that you had the issue with where it's like page 42, you've had it for 6 months. Why not flip that? And, because that is an immediate, like, you've created, I'm not saying you, but like now there's a clear divide, like interior designer, builder, no relationship.
Yeah. Where
now it's like the builder's going to frustrate the client and the client's going to look at you and you're going to be like, he had it for 6 months. Why not flip that and say, hey, we're going to give this to the builder, but now I want to schedule time with you and I want to make sure, hey, I know you're coming up on light fixture layout. Like, just a reminder, this is on page 42. I've pulled out the page. It's right here. Like, what about, we talk, us and your side of it, we talk about making the journey for the client as easy and as simple as possible, answering to them. But, there is something to be said about the fact that, an architect, a designer, could take this road of creating the process for the builder, because maybe this guy, maybe he does suck, and maybe his process is completely trash, but he doesn't want to suck. And instead he's just in this like spiral of like not being able to catch up and not be able to get his shit together. And instead of ever having an opportunity to catch his breath, he's got a designer basically being like, you've had the information for 6 months. Good luck, buddy. And this is not a shot at you, but I just think that like there is this opportunity to work more in a unified way that allows some of these. I mean, not every one of them. Like, there's plenty of builders out there that, this guy might be one of them. Like, that just would never give a shit. But I don't know. It just, when you said that, I'm like, it would be interesting if there was a different approach to this from the design side, kind of handing off to the builder.
But she doesn't get to choose the builder all the time, which I think is the big issue.
Well,
no, but at the end of the day, if that builder does a shit job, like, he's hurting everyone.
No, but even to manage a builder, like I wouldn't want to be doing what you're doing. Like, Jamie, like, you have a different builder come in every single job, and your process is your process. But what if they don't like dovetail into your process correctly?
I'm
and
not
now
saying
it's
that
like,
they will.
I got to work 2x to make this job work.
Yeah.
No, that's
well,
not what I'm
okay. I hear you both.
All right. Mediate.
Yeah. Nick, I think, again, every project that we do, it's like, okay, we can add this into our already wonderful process to make it even better for people who need more hand-holding. We try to be collaborative for sure, but there also comes a time where it's like, I have my shit together. We've done all of this. I cannot babysit you. You are a full-grown adult with a business. Learn how to make it work. So it's kind of a balance of, we're not trying to like, we sneakily sent this to you and then throw you under the bus. Like, that's not good for us. It's not good for the client. Like, we have the client's best interest at heart at the end of the day. And unfortunately, a lot of times that means like fighting with the builder, not fighting with the builder, but like, they seem to be a lot of times the weak link without the process, without, whatever, they're missing the things in our experience, which I hate. We've worked with some great ones, and it makes, like Tyler's saying, it makes our job a lot easier. And I think that's why we also have, like we were talking about earlier, within the scope of work, where it's like phrased nicely, but basically, if we have to babysit your builder and then it's taking my team so many extra hours to reconfirm and hold his hand and lead him to water, like, that's a lot of extra time that is not my fault, and that we didn't include in your original scope. So I think we've tried to, like, we're willing to do that. We say all the time, like, we end up doing 3 people's jobs, in this project, but we can't do it for free anymore.
I see it from the perspective of like, you come to the table and the client wants to pick a contractor and you offer suggestions, that it would be similar to us signing a job with the client and then them choosing all of the subcontractors that we have to use. Like, I would have to protect myself from like, hey, this is what we're including. But if we end up, same thing as you, we end up having to 2x our management because these subs don't work and don't mesh well with our systems. I think that would be the most difficult. And like, you can account for as much as you're going to get into, but at what point do you stop building your system and your processes in your business based around the shortcomings of the people that you're working with?
I'm fully with you on that. I'm not saying that we're babysitting or even like filling in where like the shortcomings are. I'm saying we build all of these processes and communication kind of funnels for the client, where, if the situation was flipped around and a client handed me subcontractors and I decided to take that job, right? Like, not probably going into it, it wouldn't be something I would do. But if that was the situation at hand, I would still want to deliver the information to these trades with like full, like basically as clear as I can. And Jamie, it sounds like you're already doing that. I guess where I'm going with it is broader picture, design community, architect community. I've experienced the other side of that where they don't. It's constant undermining, and it's not a collaborative process, and they make our job far more difficult. Where ultimately, that particular example you mentioned, just I look at it as that's a great opportunity where you continue to refine your process. And sure, it might seem like hand holding, but you set this like automatic cadence of information going out where it's like, hey, you get notified that framing rough got signed out. Boom, here you go. Here's all your sconce locations. Like, rather than looking through the whole document, I know you're going to need these next week. It's more that rather than like builder by builder. I'm trying to fill in where they're lacking.
Yeah. And again, I think there's no harm in over communicating. And that's something it's like, okay, now we know another place where we can over communicate next time.
Yeah.
And just it's a constant evolution. But like you said, I get it from the builder side too, because there's, just like I'm hating a little bit on GCs right now, but there's great ones and there's terrible ones. And again, no one does things the same way. Same with designers. I know there's designers that give you a Pinterest picture and say, here you go, I did the design. And it's like, you have nothing. And then you're doing the job of figuring out all these things on site. And that's a lot of extra work on you. So yeah, let's just create a little group of people that are actually good at their jobs and we can work only with them. And that would be great.
Seems like it would be easy, right?
Yeah, it does.
So a few times you mentioned the way that you describe your work as identity architecture, branding through space. Can you elaborate a little bit more on what that means to you?
Yeah. So I, again, have a advertising, marketing, branding background. So I think about brand a lot. And I think I bring that lens to interiors, where I'm really thinking about whether it's a commercial space that has a literal brand or it's a home, which is what we're doing more often, but it's reflecting your personal brand. Like your house says a lot about who you are, especially, the homes that we're working on. It's high net worth individuals. It's multi-million-dollar homes. Like these people are, having clients over to entertain, or they're on Zooms, or they're, whatever. Like people are seeing into other people's homes a lot more often. And I just think it really says something about who you are. And that can be used really strategically if it's considered an intentional.
How do you, I guess, what's the first part of your process where it's like, I want to create, like, for me, I think that's just not the way that my brain operates, where it's like, I'm going to take this person's personal brand and then mesh that in with their space. Like, what's that process look like, going from the inspiration and the brand, the personal identity of this person, and then being able to integrate that into the design?
So we have a pretty hefty discovery process that we do with a long questionnaire that's more than just like, what color do you like? It's a lot of pretty deep, like psychological things on there as well that are calling back to what are your values? What are core memories you have from childhood? Like just these different things to sort of bring out some of these identity pieces in people and what's important to them. That's not just surface level, because I think on the client side, a lot of times they're like, okay, I'm looking at Pinterest. I'm looking at this article that says what's trending right now. I'm looking at my neighbor's kitchen. Like that is not where they should be looking to get a home that's really unique to them and really represents them. So just trying to go in with that perspective for them too, so that they're thinking about that. And it's like, once I have all that information, it makes it a lot easier for me to design, because I actually know who you are. And I know when we're sourcing art, like places that are special to you that I can call back to, or, just different things like that, where it's not just, okay, we're tossing this generic thing on the wall because I have no idea who you are or what you care about. We can really incorporate those values into design. And I think then you have a story for people. And from our perspective, when we're presenting a design, I always have reasoning behind, this is why we chose this piece or these colors or this tile. And it's not like, oh, I don't know, it's just cute, because there's a million options. And I think when you're using their identity and their story to explain your reasoning for your choices, they're like, oh yeah, how can I argue with that? That's the one for me. So it's like they don't need a million options. They understand this one weaves in with who they are and their story, and we're like reflecting that back to them. And then it makes it a really easy sell on our end.
So there's obviously like an aesthetic component to that, but do you find that most designers are creating that like more linear path from, I guess, what would be like subjective to objective, where it's like we're taking all of these things that this person likes and what's meaningful to them and how their lives are impacted by this, and then actually trying to create something more objective out of that? Like I don't feel that that's the experience that most people have with designers. Do you think that that's somewhat unique to you? I feel like most people are just like, this is cute, this is why we're putting this shit together.
Yeah, I agree. But I think I'm not most designers. And that's how I think about things. And I think it just makes a lot of sense. And again, this is coming from, what we're doing in full service, like just what I've seen, where I didn't come out of the gate doing things this way necessarily, but what I've learned, what I've seen, I'm always, reading things, learning new things. I have marketing background, like all those things are just integrating into how I think about design and how I run my business. So no, I don't think it's the norm. Hopefully more people will come around to that. I think they are a little bit, but
I think, there's so much to be taken from the hospitality side, especially from marketing, but like the process in which you go through, like everything you're talking about, it's the same in hospitality. When you're at a really high class restaurant or a hotel, it's catered to you. And there's like all these subtle cues, and it just makes it feel like it was always for you. Yeah. And I've always said, like, some of my favorite jobs ever were the ones that we were involved in everything down to, literally sourcing and placing the silverware in the drawers before they moved in. And that was cool. It was completely designed every little bit for them.
And I think it should be, again, at these price points, and they deserve something that's really unique. Like if you just want go buy the room at RH, I always say, like, do not hire us. I'm not worried if you don't value like getting something really unique and that's really representative of you, then like just go buy the room at RH. That's cool.
Totally. And that's what we're doing with White Oak. And we had, actually someone reach out today looking to move, and they were interested in purchasing the property. And in the email, they said, what really attracts me to this property is that it's complete and it's like done, not construction done, but the interiors are fully resolved, and it's not a house that he has to buy and then have to basically decorate and change interiors. It's already been done, and he loves the idea that he could just move in. And we're going to be staging it with incredible furniture. And everyone's like, does it come with the house? I'm like, if they want it.
Want it to, yeah.
Yeah. I'm doing it for photos, but if they want it, they can move in, and I'll leave everything right there.
Yeah. That project is awesome, by the way. And I think that's how you first came across my radar, talking about that on maybe Brad's podcast or something. But I was like, oh, finally someone that sees like spec homes, it feels bad to even call it that, but in the same way that I do. I think there's just such an advantage to having a really high quality, thought out, intentional spec home space for someone to move into. And that's not often how they're done.
Yeah, our like builders and designers all see this as like, this is a no-brainer. This is going to be great. This is going to be successful. Anyone that is looking at this from a financial perspective thinks I'm an absolute psychopath.
Yeah.
And that's fine. Like ultimately it's up to me to prove that this works, but that's exactly it. There's a demand for higher quality homes and for people that don't want to go through a 3-year building process.
Right.
Where it's like, hey, this is built, it's fully done, interiors are fully resolved,
Yeah.
You can move in tomorrow. It's more money than the spec down the street, but it's done. It's for
Right.
you. It was built for you. You just didn't know until it was here.
Right. Yeah.
So, Jamie, you've been pretty vocal about, I guess I can call it the gap between decorators and designers. So, could you briefly unpack the difference between the two of them in simplest terms, like for listeners, especially some builders who I think a lot of people don't really understand like what the difference is.
Yeah, I think so too. And I often have to take myself out. We're like so entrenched in this industry that it's like, how do you not know? But yeah, most people don't. I think, and no shade to decorators either. They certainly have a place. I think that it's just that people need to know the difference, and they need to know that they're comparing apples to apples, especially when they're hiring someone. So I see a decorator as someone who's coming in, after the fact, whether it's new construction, it's already built, or it's just an existing house that someone wants a refresh on, and they're sort of choosing paint colors, maybe choosing furniture, art, that kind of thing, sort of finishing out the top layer, making the home feel nice. And then what we do as designers is, especially, again, a lot of our projects are new construction, ground up construction. We are in there from the moment people have the lot. And I think a lot of times people don't understand that. And they think, oh, we'll call you once the house is done, we'll call you 3 months before we move in, or we'll call you when the house is framed. And at that point, they've really missed the boat. We are involved collaborating with the architect at the beginning, looking at things from an interior perspective, because a lot of times architects are like, their main thing is the exterior. So we've had instances where the windows in the primary bedroom are too close together to fit a king bed between them, or just things like that we're looking at it from that perspective, and they are not always. And again, with the client lens in mind too, we're knowing what the client wants and what serves them functionally, and how we can modify and space plan a little bit differently based on that. And then we're doing, all the drawing, all of the hard finish selections. We do furniture and all that stuff too, but that's really, for us, a little more secondary. We do a lot of the construction stuff, and I think a lot of people don't understand that or know that. So
ideally, like the point in the process that you're brought in, would it be after like a bid set were produced, or like there was some sort of design on the table, but just not completely baked at this point?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. Again, as with everything, the theme of this conversation is like every project is different, and I think where builder, architect, and designer come in, it depends on the client. Either any three of us could be the first on the project, depending on the client and the job. But I think for us, if we're not first on the project, then yeah, as soon as the architect has some sort of rough floor plan drawn and you've kind of done some programming with them, we want to be brought in, no later than that. So we can be, again, giving our input to those plans even before it goes to, permitting, that kind of thing. And then oftentimes we're working on like interior pricing sets and things like that kind of in tandem. So we like to be brought in early for sure. And a lot of people, like, I'm constantly on Instagram trying to be like, this is when you hire us. This is when you hire us, because there's nothing worse than something that would have been a great project and they want us and we want them. But it's like, oh yeah, everything's already framed. And you're like, whoa, that's way too late in the process,
I mean, it's difficult enough. And I think that the problem is, and it's a recurring theme during this conversation, that like there is no standard, right?
Yeah.
And like for it to depend on the client and what works for the client as far as architect, interior designer, and contractor. To me, it's like, in an ideal world, what does that look like? Should we create processes where it's like this should be the standard? Because even just having preliminary plans done and then bringing a designer in to say like, okay, the front of the house has to look a certain way, but the sides where we have windows where it's not so critical to like balance and layout.
Yeah.
From an interior perspective, this makes way more sense to move this and here for furniture,
right,
whatever we're going to do on the interiors. And like, even to hit pause at that point or have the working relationship with the architect that it's not going to make their job harder. Like, I
Right.
think that's what it comes down to. And it's like being able to create these processes by which we could seamlessly plug somebody in to do their job where it's not going to hang us up, where it's like, let's have the architect develop their preliminary plan, and then we're going to send this to the interior designer. They're going to redline this. They're going to have their ideas, and then we're going to sit down together and we'll go over this. The architect can hash out why they made certain decisions, and the designer can work together to make sure that those decisions make the most amount of sense from their perspective,
Right.
and then go into like the second round of design. But the fact that there's no standards and that nobody does anything the same way, and that a lot of times architects aren't willing to do that because it's just going to drag this project out longer for them, like it just makes it so hard for all of us.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think we have a complicated industry and there's a lot of players and there's egos involved sometimes. And again, no one does anything the same way. So it's hard. It's really hard to like wrap your arms around it or give the client an expectation or like, this is how it goes, because the answer is almost always, it depends.
Right. It's also, I mean, you think about clients, like what they ultimately compromise on or what we compromise on and what the client just doesn't care about.
Yeah.
And I think, your comment about, the house is already framed and it's too late, right? Like you're too late in the process. We need to be involved before that. I agree. And like at the level of detail that we build and that we're focused on and ultimately the level of detail we think our clients care about.
Yeah.
But the reality is I walked a project, another builder in town, north of $20 million home. And it was beautiful, but there was like elementary mistakes, like clashes with like the way a vanity clashed into a window casing, and the window casing was like notched around the countertop. And I'm looking at it, I'm like, it wasn't thought. And I'm like, I would lose my mind. I'd move the window. I'd make a smaller vanity, something.
Yeah.
And in that moment, I'm like, the client just doesn't care, like doesn't know enough to care. Like they're just, but we sweat those details. Like and ultimately I think we like to think that our clients hire us because we care so much about those details. But there's probably some truth to be said that if we didn't point those details out and they did happen, the client would be like, that's fine.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah,
it's like, but
I agree. There's definitely things that we know, it's like only we will see this. But I think too, it just goes back to who you are, your level of integrity, where you're like, I want this to be right, not because the client's going to catch me or not, just because that's the standard that we hold. So I think it's safer to err on that side, and
totally.
just it's done. And then in that case, it's like you wouldn't have had to do a move the window or make a smaller vanity. Like if you had someone on board from the get-go, and we've already seen that in our 3D model, oh, this condition is clashing, let's solve for it now while it's on paper before anything permanent has happened, versus like, oh crap, we're in the field, we have the windows, we have all this stuff, then it becomes a bigger problem.
Yeah. I want to go back to you were talking about the branding and like the personal brand, and a question just popped up in my head. You talk about this in-depth questionnaire that you go through, and I love branding. I love all things branding. I love the process of going through it. I love brand strategy, and obviously I relate it to hospitality. But in doing that, is there one question that every time you get that filled out that you're excited to read that is like the most telling of who this client might be? And if so, like, what is that question?
That's a good one. I think from an aesthetic standpoint, one that tells us a lot is like, what's a hotel or restaurant that you visited that made you say like, I want to live here. Because I think that with, people a lot of times have trouble. And this is why we have this whole questionnaire too. If you're just like, what's your style? People have no idea what style terms mean. I say modern and people hear 1,000 different things, it means something different to everyone. So I think by using those reference points, it's easier to get on the same page. And often when you ask them that too, it's not like, oh, it had this really pretty color blue and that's it. There's an emotion tied to it where it's like, oh, it made me feel this way, or like we kept going back here because, and all of our family milestones happening. Like there's more to the story. So that's in a lot of the questions, it's like we're asking you the question, but really we're reading between the lines of what's the emotion there, like what is making that impactful to you, and then trying to translate that into design direction.
There's so many opportunities for those type of questions where they're such a low lift but have such a massive impact as far as like progress to be made with decisions, where you don't have to do any of the work. It's like you don't have to reinvent the wheel to get these answers from you and drive the decisions that bring us to like where we need to be.
Yeah.
One of my favorite examples is we had a client a couple years ago, and we were in a design meeting and they had just got back from vacation. And I was asking, where they stayed and, just kind of small talk. And he goes, I got to tell you my favorite part of this hotel. And I'm like, all ears. Cause like, I'm going to take some cue from this and like go back to the design team. He goes, when I turned the sink on, the water landed directly in the center of the drain. No splashing in the sink.
Wow. Yeah.
And his wife starts laughing, and she's like,
this is what I live with.
It's literally all he talked about the whole time. Every time he turned the sink on, he's like, look how this was planned out. And we never ended up building that project, but I'll never, like, we had
like, I would have centered that faucet.
We had it every drawing. It was like center faucet on drain, make sure water, like,
insane degree. Yes. Yeah. And what I feel like it really comes down to, Nick, is like you're listening. Like people just want to feel seen and heard at the end of the day, period. Especially when you're building this huge project for them. They're investing all this money. They want to feel like you get them and not like you're just steamrolling them with your agenda. So I think little things like that, it's like, oh my God, they saw me, they listened to me. And then that builds so much trust also.
It's like Tyler said, it's so low lift. It's like, okay, so I just got to coordinate to make sure the drain's in the right spot.
The rest of the project can be dog shit.
Yeah, but that drain,
like, dude, water swoosh. Yeah, total swoosh.
Yeah, well, it's low lift, but it's not because people are overlooking that stuff. You have to be
typically right. Typically,
so it's like it seems low lift to us, but that's not the norm, and it could be. It's not that hard. But you do just have to be thoughtful and intentional.
It's effort. It goes back to my favorite book ever is Unreasonable Hospitality.
I love that book too.
And the example of him going out and getting the hot dogs for the guys that came to New York that never got you read that and it's like, that's so easy. It's like, sure. And that is wildly impactful in that moment.
Yep.
And it's everyone thinks that these, I think that's what people don't put any effort into it because they overthink it. Yeah. It's like, just listen and pay attention to exactly what you said, Jamie. Like the client just wants to know that you're listening, because when they turn that sink on every day, the rest of their life, and they look down and they're going to think like, I was the one that they were like, that was me. I said something and they did it. Yeah, absolutely. And I have been talking about this recently too, where along those same lines, to me, my definition of luxury is not, oh, it's fancy and it's expensive. Like that is not luxury to me. Mm-hmm. Luxury to me is thoughtfulness and personalization. Yeah. So that hot dog is way more luxurious than giving that guy, $1 million caviar thing. Like that means nothing. Like that's just expensive and fancy that has no meaning, versus a $1 hot dog. That's super luxurious in that scenario, So I think about that a lot with our projects. It's like, we're not just trying to be, and I'm not a fancy formal person anyway. That's not how we design, but it's like, I want your stuff to be really nice, but not gold-plated Venetian palace. I want it to be personalized. And so again, that just goes back to why we are so crazy about the identity piece, because it can't be personalized and you can't have those thoughtful touches if you don't know who they are.
You better get out of Florida soon if you don't want Gold Palace Venetian. I feel like it's the home of that shit. One of the reasons why
many reasons why I need to get out of Florida, but yeah, that might be on.
Yeah. A lot of statues when you like come into the driveway, lions and shit.
Yeah, we don't do that.
I find it interesting, your background and how that translates to what you're doing with your design business. And I think that you're bringing a lot of different perspectives and leveraging a lot of your last career, which is obviously benefiting your perspective of the design industry. Um, was that transition easier or harder than you anticipated? Like going and working for somebody, having whatever was the catalyst to make you shift. I know that you briefly said it was like, I just don't want to be told what to do, but then starting your own business, like, was that transition as impactful, as easy? What was that transition like for you?
Okay, I don't think it's ever easy. And I think, Nick, I just saw you talking about this somewhere about like what's something you thought when you started your business that you don't now, that you thought you'd like work less or it'd be more flexible. And then you're like, no, actually, I work way more. So there's that aspect of it where it's like I work way more, but I love it. I'm obsessed with it. I am so passionate about what I do, and not only the design side, but the business as well. Like I love equally. So it's not easy to run your own business, but for me, like it's that whole choose your hard thing. So I would much rather this be the hard that I've chosen than the hard being I go work in a corporate place, 9 to 5, and someone tells me what to do. Like I could not even, I would perish. I could not even imagine at this point. So, I think no, it wasn't easy, but I was happy to be doing it. And I've always felt that way. And there's a lot of challenges that come with running your own business and starting it from scratch. I went to design school, but they teach you nothing about running a design business. And I have a business background, but again, it's like school versus real life, two totally different things. So there's a lot that you learn on the job, no matter how, quote unquote, prepared you are prior to starting. So I have zero regrets about making the leap. I think again, this is the hard that I would choose 100%.
On that note, you've talked a lot about like CEO education, and you referenced CEO earlier. What is the biggest takeaway from being part of like CEO education, or whether it's like community circles or things like that?
Ooh, I think in general, this is very broad, but like treating your business like a business, I think, especially in creative fields in the design industry, people are like start it as a hobby or, that kind of thing. And they keep going on in that way. They're not thinking of it as a business. They're not running it like a business. And that's super important. And same goes for pricing and profitability. A lot of people are great at their craft. They've got a great eye. They're great at designing, but they have no idea how to translate that into a profitable business. And that's a problem because you can't stay in business if you're not profitable. So I think just having that mindset of this is a business, you are a CEO, or again, getting someone in there if you really don't have or like that skill set, like thinking about hiring someone to be more of an operator and run the business side if that's truly not anything that you want a part of.
So you mentioned that you hit a breaking point in 2022. Can we dig into that a little bit? Was that regard to the business end of things, personal struggles, like owning the business, being in the business? What contributed to that?
I think it was a big turning point for me where I got really intentional about what I was doing. Prior to that, I was trying to start the business. You're saying yes to everything. You're doing whatever. Just, that's how a lot of people start. And I got to the point where I was so busy, I'm treading water, but not thinking at all about what do I want this business to be going forward? How do I want this to run? What do I want my process to be? I wasn't thinking about those things. I was just being very reactionary to the work that was coming in, and not really considering those other things like the business side of it as much. So 2022 is when both of my children were in daycare, first of all, so I had a little more bandwidth to actually think about these things. And I started investing pretty heavily in my business at that point as well. I did a rebrand. I did some, courses. I invested in some mentors. I did a bunch of different things all around that time. And it really flipped the trajectory of my business, I think, in terms of pricing, in terms of process, in terms of, again, being really intentional with the kinds of jobs that we were going to take on moving forward. All of that shifted around that time.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. So many people I speak to from like a consulting perspective as well, they get so busy like you were, and they're treading water,
Yeah.
and they're almost like tied to the point in business where they are, and they think like they have this success because they're busy, when in actuality they're just laying out the next 5 years of their life to be more of the same type of crap.
Right.
Where if you like stepped back and you became more intentional and you created somewhat of a plan, or even just where you want to be, what's your ideal project, who's your ideal client, and you started focusing on that, and rather than saying yes to one person, you said no to one person, and then focus your marketing efforts or your lead gen on that more ideal client, more ideal experience and project, like how much growth you would actually have, and how much more opportunity there's going to be to get your head above the water. Like, people just don't understand that.
Yeah, there's a lot, and it can be scary. I get that. I too, talk to other designers, and it's the same thing over and over, where they're like, "Oh, I know I need to start turning away projects. I know I need to, but then I'm not, and I'm still in this cycle." And it's like, well, you'll never get out until you start setting a standard and start saying no. And yes, that can be scary, but you have to say no to give room to projects that you really want, that are more aligned with where you're going. All of that. If you're so wrapped up in busy with all these projects that are draining you and not feeling aligned, you're really not going to have the time or energy to get those other projects.
So what were those projects like at that point? I guess at that point it's 4 years into owning your business, and it probably came from the fear of not having work, where it's like you're just going to say yes to anything and everything that comes along your way. But what was it about those projects that you feel didn't align with you, or weren't going to support the future that you wanted?
Well, it was also, I was in a bit of a unique situation. I was working with a custom home builder, and they were wanting me to do all of their client projects. So really it was driven a lot by them. They were super busy. I was doing all their projects. I didn't really it felt like I couldn't really say no. So they had all kinds of styles, personalities, red flag, things happening with their clients that I was sort of subject to and drug along with at that time. And so that was hard too, where it's like, I'm not just saying no to one client, I'm cutting off this entire arm of business. That
was like the primary, all your leads are being generated from that. You weren't really doing a ton of your own job.
Right. Which really shot me in the foot as well, because I was so busy. I wasn't really marketing myself. And then when I cut that off, it was almost like, okay, I'm starting back at square one now to get the word out there.
Yeah.
So, there's definite things I would have done differently there, but I always like to just take nuggets away, like everything happens as it was supposed to. On the upside, that got me a lot of really great multi-million-dollar new construction experience.
Yeah.
So, and I got my reps in. I got to go through a ton of designs, really hone in on my design style, like what our aesthetic is, know what red flags to avoid in the future, like all of that. So there's a lot of great learning lessons from that. But I think, the biggest things were like pricing was not aligned at that time. And I was leveling up what I was delivering. My deliverables were not as amazing as they are today, but they were still pretty good. And I was always getting better. And, they didn't want to pay that.
Yeah.
And just, again, the client personalities, there would be people we would have an initial call with, and I would be seeing red flags immediately, but I kind of had to do the job. So we did. And then it was tough, going forward. I also didn't have a strong process at that time. So a lot of it was, everything was just sort of a swirling gray area. Whereas now it's very locked down. It's very black and white, what the process is, what's included, what's not, how revisions are turned in, all of that. So again, so much of what I do today came out of all of that chaos and bad fits and misalignment. So
It's funny. I had a similar experience. I went into business for myself, started drumming up work. I wasn't, lighting the world on fire. And then I hooked up with a plumber who started landing jobs, and he would basically subcontract everything except for the plumbing and the electrical to me.
uh-huh.
So I was doing all of these remodels and renovations, but they weren't really my projects, so they weren't my ideal clients. But I was charging what I needed to, and it was just a steady income of work. And it got to the point where I was similar to you, where it's like, if I want to grow, I need to take the next step. And at that point, I rebranded. And I'm not going to lie, like one of the biggest drivers of me cutting ties with that relationship was like, I finally got a branded truck and rebranded my company. And I'm like, I don't want to be associated with this. Like, I want to get outside of this. I want to grow. And now, like, I can't hide from this. Like, visibly, you can see that I'm here. You can see who I am. You can look, and I'm like, I want to get away from this. But it was so hard because at that point, probably 50% of my income was tied to this guy, and it was constant work. But it did take me manning up and saying this isn't working anymore. And I knew it for a long time, but it's so hard to say no when you're generating all of these leads and this income, even if they're not an ideal fit. I was like, can I drum up this amount of work on my own?
Yeah.
And it wasn't until
Right.
I did that like I started developing better systems, started marketing myself because I was slow, started understanding like, this isn't what I want to do. This is where I came from. This is what I can offer. And it was just like you, it was a natural evolution where I started delivering more than I was being paid for. And that was like ultimately what created um, the driver for me to move on from that. But I do look back at that point in my career and I'm super grateful for it. And I'm not going to lie, some days I look back and I'm like, damn, that was so much easier. Like, so much easier. I think that that is a really great opportunity for somebody who's starting their business. As long as they know where they want to go and they understand that, they're going to outgrow this relationship at some point, I think that that probably offered you a really great stepping stone for your career.
Yeah, it did. It pains me a little bit to give them that credit, but yeah, it did.
Yeah, I look back on that like couple years of my life, and when I was in it, I absolutely hated it and was like disgusted by it. But I look back on it now and I'm like, it was so low pressure, and like the stuff that I was doing was so silly. And I think if I would have been in a different frame of mind, it probably would have been some of like the most enjoyable, easiest money I've ever made in my life as a business owner. But I just like didn't want to be there, and I wanted to be doing better things. But man, I was just talking to that Colin from Fine Home Building about that. I was like, the amount of stand-up bathtubs that I've put in my life. Have you ever seen them?
Yeah, I've done
Yeah,
that.
where like the people get paid by the insurance company because for one reason or another, most of these customers were like too big to get in and out of a normal bathtub. So he would put in stand-up bathtubs where you like, there's a door with a gasket and you open it up and then it has like this locking hatch that you put in, and then they can stand or sit in there and take a bath.
Sounds very high design.
It's luxury. It's called luxury.
I've ever done one of those.
Maybe you can integrate one into one of your next projects.
Yeah, I'll incorporate. That will be a fun challenge.
You should just, when they say, all right, let's do a bathtub, and then just be like, do you want a stand-up one?
Yeah.
Gasket. Ooh, yeah.
Dude, I don't know how much like Lawan I've put down in my life to put down linoleum. Lawan.
Luan.
I call it Lawan.
Wait, what do you say, Jamie?
I don't know. Not Luan.
Luan. That sounds like someone's name.
Yeah.
I don't
Like,
know.
oh, I went to school
Like,
with Luan.
dude, millions of staples putting that stuff down to put down like vinyl tile. And then we
Dude, I
upgraded
remember-
to like vinyl tile that you could grout. That was like an upgrade.
I forgot about that.
A lot of Formica countertops.
I remember when we used to back for tile. Like, I worked when I was a carpenter, and I think it must have been in high school. they would like, all right, you do all the bathroom. You're going to prep all the bathrooms for tile. And we would just go in there and put 2 layers of 1/4 inch plywood. And then he just said, nail it every 6 inches. And I was like, all right, just no screws, no glue, just nail it every 6 inches and put a second layer on. And then the tile guy will come behind. There's no way I didn't hit plumbing.
Plumbing.
Like, just blasting like 3.5-inch nails through the subfloor. And I didn't know any better back then. I was like, that's what I'm doing.
I was told I was doing things too good a lot of times. I was like, I think it might be time to move on here.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm not sure I want my truck in these neighborhoods. It was fine when I had like a pickup and a trailer that wasn't lettered.
That wasn't advertising your name.
Yeah. Once you put your name on it, it's like, I don't, then you think about where you're parking, like who's looking at it. Am I in it right? Yeah.
So speaking of the business evolution, you had mentioned that hiring your first employee was a huge turning point for you.
Yes.
How long ago was that, and what type of accountability did that create for you?
That was April of last year, so we're a little bit over a year in, and it was tough because I'm like, now I have someone's livelihood in my hands. She was coming from a very stable, more corporate-y commercial job. So I'm like, I'm taking away from this environment to come into my business. That is a lot of responsibility on my shoulders. So I took it super seriously. I got very lucky. It's actually someone I went to design school with. So I knew, how she designed. I knew her work ethic. I knew her character, all of those things. So that's a big cheat code that I don't know that I could ever replicate again, but it worked out super well. I have no regrets about bringing her on. She's definitely leveled up, allowed me to level up the business, helped level up our deliverables, all kinds of things. So it's been great having her. And I think accountability wise, I don't know that it made a huge shift. Like I, was always accountable when I was the only person here. If anything, it's nice now having someone else that can like reply to clients and knows what's going on. So it doesn't feel like everything is on my shoulders and in my brain.
Yeah.
I think it has made me put even more emphasis on excruciatingly detailing our processes. Like we had a good process, but since she's come on, I've really, really, really detailed out everything because there was still a lot that was living in my head, which came to light when I'm trying to explain things to her and train her. I'm like, oh yeah, that. Then you call the wallpaper guy. Hold on, his number's only in my phone. So really getting everything out of my brain and written down has been huge, and that sort of spurred that on, hiring her.
Yeah, I think for me, from an accountability perspective, I like the pressure of having somebody who you needed to provide work for. I think made me accountable as far as making sure there was work lined up, making sure you had those systems dialed, making sure that you were able to delegate, because it's so much simpler when it's just us, but you don't really necessarily need those systems. I think that from an accountability perspective, just like the pressure of having somebody else that you have to provide for can really make you step up your game as far as what you're doing. I think that it almost turns your projects and like your role in the business into almost R&D, where you're like constantly researching and developing your processes, the systems you're using, the products that you're using, and how you can integrate them and implement them into the everyday operation of your studio.
Yeah, I agree. And I think another thing with having her on board, it's been like, okay, I think about in terms of pricing or giving away design time. I'm like,
yeah,
now I have her. I picture her toiling away at our computer and how hard she works and her attention to detail. I'm like, no, like if anything, we need to raise our prices. This is crazy. Like the amount of effort that we're putting in collectively as a team is crazy. So I think it has made me a little more like, nope, it really is what it is now. I have someone else's salary to pay. It's not just me like, oh, okay, I feel a little bad. I can like let that one slide. Like never now,
Do you, from like a pricing perspective, now that you have an employee, I know you said that you realize you probably have to raise your prices some. Was there anything specifically that you did? Did you start pricing jobs differently at different rates? Like, what changed with hiring her versus when you didn't have an employee?
I think, again, just the level of value and deliverables that we're bringing to the table now has shot up
Yeah.
enormously having her on. She's incredibly technical. Like everyone, all my design friends know her and they're like, how do I get one of her? Like, we have really good drawings. I'm going to send you guys a set after this. But that just gives me so much confidence in selling our services in that way, because they really are excellent and so detailed and so thought through and intentional and all of that. So I think just then like pricing accordingly. Again, even back then when I was working with the builder doing all those jobs, it's like, okay, as I'm up leveling what I'm bringing to the table, the price goes with that. Someone giving you, again, a Pinterest picture is not the same as someone giving you a 50-page design drawing document, and there's a lot more hours and price that come with the second one.
Yeah, I mean, so you're not just raising your prices, you're offering
more value.
Your level of services. Yeah, correct. Yeah. Which is funny. I just recorded a podcast on something similar where it just came down to like capturing the amount of time that's going into things. Yeah. But it's not just this easy. Like when you start your business, everyone just tells you raise your prices. But you can't do that without understanding like how to sell the increased cost of that. Like what type of value, what type of experience are you bringing to the table to support that raise in your rates? And I think that's a really good perspective, where it's like we're not just raising our prices, we're delivering a higher level of service or a more comprehensive design package, which substantiates that raise in costs.
Yep. And I've said that too to people when, again, I feel like that advice is always just raise your rate, just double your blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, you can only raise it to what you can confidently say to someone.
Yeah.
What you can look someone in the eye and say without being like, ugh, and not really believing it yourself. So I think it's that like gradual level.
So Howard, like, I feel like you're at the point in your career and your business, right, where things are changing every day. Like you have a new employee, you have new systems, you're constantly bettering your systems, creating a more comprehensive design process. I'm sure that there's some efficiencies that you're creating with that. So like some of that time may be offset, but how are you pricing jobs and adjusting like to ensure that your pricing is correct on these jobs? It's a little bit what we talked about at the beginning of the conversation, but my mind goes to like when I switched from myself to having an employee, or if I have subcontractors, like my pricing has to change.
Yeah.
And then like my money is made on the back end of those projects. Like you and I could sell a job for X amount, but if you over execute or your employee puts too much time into that, it's literally costing you money. Yeah. So how are you pricing these jobs? Is it from like an hourly perspective? I know that it's past information and data that you have from other jobs that you do, but how are you pricing them to ensure that like as your company changes, you're maintaining your level of profitability, and like how are you managing that on the back end?
Yeah, I think we're always, again, using the data of the longer we've been doing this, the more data we have. And pricing is sort of a combination of, okay, looking at past data, looking at this project in scope, kind of assigning like, what do we think this is going to take us based on past things to specify each of these things, to do the drawing set, kind of tying an hourly rate to that, even though we don't charge hourly.
Yeah.
And then looking at the size. So it's sort of like I'm looking at three different things, and then they usually end up around the same, like I calculate it three different ways, it's ending up in the same vicinity. And then just always going back and checking that, like, okay, did this project, we do a post-mortem on the projects, like what did we actually make on this? How much time did we actually end up spending? How long did the project go for? Like, what can we, again, tweak going forward to make sure, like, if there was a leak in the thing here, that we can stop that up for next time.
Yeah.
And,
So do you budget a specific, like, do you and the woman who worked for you budget a specific amount of hours going into a project that you are like, hey, this is what we're thinking as far as the time it's going to take?
Internally, we do, not
Yeah.
really externally, because again,
Sure.
I just don't want people. We don't charge hourly, and I don't
Yeah.
want them tied to hourly, because for me, I want them looking at the bigger picture. We're again, I talked about buying results. Like, I want you to buy the transformation and the end result of having this beautiful personalized house and having it all done for you, not how many hours is this taking. I don't like hourly as a consumer, and I don't like to charge that way. So I think, yeah, internally we know, and we also say we only do 6 to maybe 8 max projects a year, like take
Yeah.
them on. So I don't want to be frantic and stressed and like we're working overnight and we're like, that is not conducive to creativity. That's not how I want to live my life. I'm very focused on being intentional with building my business in a way that fits with the life that I want too. So I just know myself really well. Like, I go to bed at 9 p.m. I'm not pulling all nighters for people's projects, no matter how much money it's going to make me. So we consider that too, where I'm like, I want us to have a good amount of projects where we can be profitable, but also our sanity and maintaining like some white space so we can actually be creative is really important to me.
Sure. So your post-mortem would involve looking at the amount of time spent on the project versus what you budgeted as well, and ensuring that you're like somewhere in there.
In the vicinity, yeah. Because again, it's like when we turn around and bid the next one, I need to know that. Do we need to up what we're saying it costs to do,
Yeah.
a 1,000 square foot reno, or,
I feel like if you have those systems in place, even if you're not charging hourly, like people have probably heard this before, like I am hourly now, but I used to be fixed costs. But the reason fixed costs didn't work for me is I just wasn't capturing the amount of time and I wasn't tracking it. So when I switched to hourly, it created the accountability for me to be able to manage that real time, right? Where it's like, if I were a designer and we allocated 16 hours to the discovery process, and whether it was me or I had employees, I could say we have 16 hours that we're going to spend on discovery, and they spent 12 and we're only 30% of the way through discovery. It's like, there's something wrong. So I always say that I could easily go back to fixed cost now that I understand how to manage a project on an hourly basis. I think that like it easily could be switched, but it wasn't until I really honed down on looking at like how we were spending time, and if I were able to actually capture the amount of time that we were spending, to realize like what type of profitability that we had with business.
I mean, I think that's a great lesson for anyone listening. If you're working towards a fixed cost, start with hourly, so you can actually understand whether you're charging hourly or you're just tracking it. It's like, I think a lot of guys go into it, or guys and girls go into it and want to do, if they're doing fixed cost, they're like, I'll track it and see where I end up. But the reality is a lot of people, do go into the all-nighters, Jamie, and like they're running frantic, and they never really look back and see if a job was profitable. They just know that holistically there's money in the bank, we're going to keep turning and burning. But
or they do it at the end of the job, like you said, and at that point, like way too late. That needs to be real time.
But that thought process of like going into it where we're going to bill for our time, we're going to set a budget and then see how we end up. That's going to force you to look at it and understand truly, am I estimating the job correctly? Because ultimately, that's going back to what you said in the beginning of this conversation. It's when you underestimate something, and you're adjusting it on the next one. But what I think was important that you said is that you're looking at it and then questioning, why did we go over, and was it justified? And adapting accordingly. I think that's where there's a lot of opportunity for lesson.
One thing that I'm curious about, how much of your your business and the money that you make is based on like the amount of time you're putting into these jobs versus markups on, like, you sell materials, I would assume.
I don't sell materials. In general, that's, again, every designer does it differently. A lot of designers want to buy stuff and then you have a conversation. I don't, because I don't want the headache. I would rather, for construction, specify, let you guys deal with it. But we do sell furniture, so we make
What
money.
about like kitchens, cabinetry? No, that's all the contractor. You'll specify, they'll buy.
Yeah.
So you have what? So if you're selling furniture and sourcing furniture on a job, still, I would assume that most of your money that you're making is through your design fee, not necessarily through like furniture.
Well, it depends on the project. Again, it depends on like the project and the size and the scope, but it can be 50-50 roughly.
Yeah. That's interesting that you don't like. I feel most designers that I work with, any type of finish they want, like if it's a lighting package, if it's sink fixtures, stuff like that, they're typically wanting to buy, and it's the conversation where it's like, I get it, but at the end of the day, then you're getting this stuff shipped to the job, and I'm the one intaking it, and then I'm the one opening it up, and if it's damaged, I have to coordinate, and it's like, that doesn't, like, that's what you're supposed to be doing.
I would say that's not how it should go then. If a designer is insisting on buying it, then they're also responsible for receiving it, checking for damages, getting it to site, all of that stuff, in my mind. So
I agree, and that's probably why you don't want to do it.
Right. I don't think, well, and we do, like, we'll buy lighting, typically decorative lighting, and like wallpaper are two things that we buy. But with like, huge shipments of tile and plumbing and things like that, for me, the margin is just not there for the amount of headache that it is for a 2-person team. Yeah. Again, people have different team structures that they want to handle that. Like, I just don't. Again, I know myself really well. I really value keeping my peace. And to me, buying, plumbing fixtures and then being on the hook for like 5%, like, that's not worth it to me.
Yeah. No, I think that at the end of the day, like, the money needs to be made wherever you can most efficiently as a business and wherever you can provide the most value. And I feel like it's low hanging fruit to say, like, I'm going to buy tile and then
just to
get like a couple of, like, just find a way to integrate that into your process and to sell that to your clients and bring value some other way. And then let the contractor deal with that and measure that and then pick it up. And if the lot's a different color, like, they can deal with that. Yeah. And even just like from a staging perspective, you either need a warehouse to be able to accept all this stuff, to be able to open up and check it and then deliver it to the job site, or you're shipping everything to the job site and then having to make trips to the job site. It's just like, you're not at the job site every day. So I feel like it's money that's spent that doesn't need to be spent.
Yeah, I agree. To me, it's not efficient for how we run our process. And again, I know, like, we purchase furniture and it's a huge headache. Like, it is massively, stressful to me to have $500K of furniture in my hands. Like, that's stressful enough. I have that going on. We have hundreds of pieces floating around that we're tracking and dealing with damages and talking to vendors. Like, I don't want that on the construction side also. And then again, typically builders want to buy that stuff and are used to dealing with it anyway. So for me, that's what works.
Let's switch the conversation to tariffs and how they've affected your furniture buying. Dude,
I just got off.
I'm just kidding.
I just got off a phone call with a client that was negotiating around tariffs. I'm like, there's no possible way I can track that.
Yeah. Well, also, I'm like, it's not like, people have said this, like, are you concerned? I'm like, no, it's not like I am suddenly saying we're raising our price. It's like, hello, if you've looked outside, it's the world. It's not us. I have no control over this. Like, it is what it is. I fortunately didn't have anything like in limbo where I had quoted things and then by the time I was ordering them, it had gone up. So I didn't have to have that conversation. But again, if I did, it would be like, have you read a paper? Like,
my wife's in furniture production and she has like vendors that they have contracts with that they've signed, that like they've done all of this market research to break, like this furniture is getting made 18 months out. Like it's for like 3 seasons down the road. And like all of this due diligence and market research been put in, and now it's like, oh yeah, however much more. So now everyone's trying to negotiate to try and get the prices down, but it's like it's costing them more. Why should they just eat it? And then my wife's company is like, well, we can't raise the prices. Like this is what's going to work. So it's a friggin' mess. That's not really what I wanted to talk about. I just thought that it was funny that you were talking about furniture, and it's like the whole furniture industry is upside down right now. I guess kind of wrapping things up, what you're still early on in your career, 7 years in. To me, 7 years is the sweet spot where you finally pull your head out of your ass and start realizing like where you make money, where you don't make money. You like have enough confidence in yourself and your business to tell people no, or to like stick to your guns. I think that 7 years for me, if anyone's like, how long do I have to be in business before I start to figure it out? 7 years is the spot for me. So you're like, I feel if you've made it this far, you have the opportunity to take it as far as you want, but you're still new in your career. What's next for Studio Gaspo that like we should know about, listeners should know about? I'm just interested to hear.
Yeah, I think if you know me, you know, like I always have something brewing. I'm never content, not content, but like complacent. I'm always evolving, thinking of something, learning something new, and applying that. So I've got a couple things behind the scenes. One I can't talk about, but it's a potential acquisition of another company in the space. That's interesting that we're in very early stages of. And then another one is something that I am building to take the discovery process that we talked about and sort of spin that out into its own offering. I think a lot about, you know, only a very few number of people can hire us, but I think there's a way to scale sort of our lens and what we're thinking about to get started and give people some clarity. So working on an initiative behind that right now.
That's awesome. I feel like there's so many opportunities for business and for business owners and entrepreneurs to diversify their business, make their lives a little bit easier, and hopefully improve quality of life, quality of business, all those things.
Yeah, absolutely.
And obviously you have the big move coming up. So
one day to where we don't know, but yeah, eventually.
Just not Florida.
Posted, yeah.
Is there anything else that you have that you want to touch on? Anything that's pressing for you that we didn't touch on that you want to clarify? Anything? The stage is yours.
No, just when you guys have a project that you need an awesome designer on, let me know.
Sold me.
Absolutely. I'd be interested to see your drawings. I know that you have some stuff going on with your discovery process, but it'd be neat just to learn a little bit more. I think that for me, the big takeaway here, the way that you design and your background with the corporate environment and advertising and just being able to create more of a linear process between like what customers' wants and needs are and the design, because I feel like you're taking all of these hypotheticals and then you need to actually put pen to paper and create like a physical product. And for me, that's the most difficult part, and creating like a linear process there and what you do with your discovery, and then having like the emotional ties to that where it sells the customer and they're like, yeah, like absolutely, we love that. That makes so much sense. Now we understand why you chose this. And it's not just like you said, presenting them with the Pinterest board and being like, it all looks pretty together, right? Yeah. There's a story behind it. And I think that that's really, really interesting and a really powerful perspective that I don't think I've heard from any designers. I think that they maybe think that that's what they're doing, but it doesn't feel that way. So I think that's really cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, Jamie, appreciate it. Appreciate you running into us in Vegas and getting yourself on the podcast.
Yeah.
Like Tyler said, I love your approach. I love the brand centric approach, and you know, obviously we share the similarities around hospitality and the client experience, and the fact that you're taking a lot of what you've implemented in your business and then creating its own offering. I think is incredibly gracious but equally as smart as a business owner. So kudos to you.
Thank you guys.
Appreciate your time. I know it's difficult to take time out of the day. Are your kids twins, by the way?
They're not twins, but
No.
they're
Close in age.
people think that they're 19 months apart, and they look more and more alike every day. So
How old are they now?
5.5 and 4.
Nice.
But you said they went to daycare or whatever at the same time, and I'm like,
Well,
you
yeah,
guys have twins.
one was like home because of COVID for a while, and then there, but the other one was little and just like I had a 10-hour a week babysitter situation, and so then when he finally went, also it was like
freedom,
more than 10 hours a week to try to get my life together.
Yeah,
to stop taking on these crappy projects.
That's amazing. Well, good luck with everything. I definitely appreciate your time, perspective. It was really a nice conversation to have, and I think refreshing for me.
Well, thank you. I'm happy to hear that. It was good to talk to you guys. Thanks for letting me on.
Of course. I think it's super cool that she approaches this as a brand and looks at, I think personal brand is such a buzzword now, but like that ultimately what it is. She's looking at the client as an individual and building something, around that. You think of, there's so many designers that literally just pick colors and fabrics and textures and put them on a platter and be like, this is what your house is going to look like. And I'm like, it just feels empty. Like, you gotta dig deeper.
I'm also just impressed. I think even, dealing with Drew and speaking with Drew, who did the design for a lot of modern Craftsman things, and obviously your brand, Nick, but being able to like quantify what people are saying with regard to their personal needs and their brand and what's important to them and the ethos of who they are, and then be able to translate that into this like objective being of an actual brand on paper is similar to what Jamie's doing, right? Where it's like you're taking all of these ideas and wants and needs and inspiration, and then being able to curate that to create a physical product. To me, like, my brain doesn't work that way, and I don't know how they make that transition. And I think the way that she explained it and like how linear she makes that, and how she can tie like the emotion to the design is a really neat perspective.
Yeah, I think, it's super smart. And I think, like, even from a business perspective, her 7 years in, focused on the CEO role, focused on business, thinking about process, thinking about how to continue to improve the client experience. I think a lot of that has to do with her background and just working, in corporate, but, also just the entrepreneurial spirit and the desire to not take order from anyone else and go off and do her own thing. So yeah, Jamie was great. Guys, as always, make sure you head up moderncraftsman.co. There's a newsletter on there. We share a bunch of the behind the scenes. I've been having fun with it. I've been sharing a bunch of the documents that we use internally. And oftentimes it has to do with a conversation that we have today. So next Monday, or this, what would be yesterday, depending on when you're listening to it. But I'll send out an email in the morning and give you a little bit of intel about what's going on in my business, how I'm running my business, and some tactical things. And then a few of you guys had reached out, and because we had mentioned this last podcast, Tyler and I, we're going to launch a monthly workshop. So pay attention to social media and or the newsletter. You should be signed up for the newsletter because that's where all that information is coming out first. But we're going to be launching a monthly workshop to hop on with you guys and work through some tactical stuff in our business, in your business, to make you guys more profitable and implement systems like Jamie did in her business.
Trust my mama, you're no match for my bad karma.